In this video, we're going to look at good and bad example body paragraphs for analyzing an author's observations. And we're going to use the same topic that we've been using for the prior videos. That is the question of what are E.M. Forster's observations about sexual orientation in the novel Maurice. And we're going to be working from the same thesis as well. So let's just begin looking at these examples. So look at example A. You can pause your video here and then we'll come back and talk about it. So this is a bad example. First of all, the topic sentence does not specifically say what Forster's observation is. It just says that he makes an observation about whether a person's sexual orientation is a choice. Well, does he think it is or is not a choice? We need to answer that question here, and this doesn't do that. Then most of the rest of this paragraph is just, it reads like a plot summary. It's just quote, 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 with no explanation, no analysis of how those quotes would reveal anything about whether Forster thinks a person's sexual orientation is a choice or not. It's only when we get down to here, when it's too late, that the writer states that. Right there, the writer says, okay, he doesn't believe it's a choice, but it's too late then. We've been through all the evidence, and so it's hard for us to tell how that evidence made that point with no explanation, no analysis. All right, let's look at B. So you can pause the video and then we'll come back and talk about it. So B is also a bad example, although it's a little better in the topic sentence department than in A. So this topic sentence isn't bad. At least it's clear. It says, well, his observation is that a person's sexual orientation is not a choice. The problem is, after that, we again have the situation of just presenting evidence, quote, 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 with no explanation intermixed with it to explain how those quotes demonstrate that Forster believes that a person's sexual orientation is not a choice. It doesn't really do that. And again, it's only at the end here in the second part where we get the analysis. So the analysis is totally separated from the evidence, which is not good. You need to intermix that. All right, let's look at example C next. So you can pause the video and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, so C is our good example. First of all, it has a very strong topic sentence here. One of Forster's most powerful observations is that a person's sexual orientation is not a matter of choice. It clearly and specifically says what he thinks about that. Right? It doesn't just say that he has an observation, it says what the observation specifically is. And then, just looking at the first of these three paragraphs here, it presents each piece of evidence with analysis before and or after it to explain how that evidence, how that quote demonstrates that observation. So we get a little framework analysis here, a little preview analysis that previews how the upcoming quote is going to show that Maurice doesn't want to be gay. He did not choose that. And then we get the quote that demonstrates that. Right? And then we get a little analysis after that that sort of explains exactly how that quote does show that, you know, he is not choosing this. This is against his will. And this really goes back to the method of determining an author's observation that we talked about in the previous video, which is success or failure. So all of these examples are really examples of how Maurice tries to avoid his sexual orientation, but that he fails to resist it. And so Forster is showing that doesn't work, and that therefore sexual orientation is not a choice. All right. We have in the next sentence some framework analysis, some preview analysis saying, you know, that Maurice is trying to avoid acting upon his feelings, and then we have a quote that shows him doing that. And then we have another piece of framework analysis here saying even when he accepts his orientation, he does so reluctantly. And then we have a quote that shows him being kind of very reluctant and resigned even as he accepts his orientation. And then we have kind of a little reminder, a recap of the topic sentence, which you don't have to have, but sometimes if you want to bring people back to the point, you can do that. So you can see there with the coloration that there's a real intermixture of evidence and analysis, right? Each piece of evidence in the green is either preceded or followed by an explanation of how it shows the topic sentence point, which is that Forster believes sexual orientation is not a choice. And these are just additional paragraphs here later, just different kind of subset of examples showing that sexual orientation is not a choice. This is one about how Mars tried to change his sexuality and that didn't work, how Mars tried to date women and how that didn't work. So they're just different examples that all show this main topic sentence point, which is sexual orientation is not a choice. Obviously, you don't have to have multiple paragraphs for one observation. Usually you just have one. But in this case, there was a lot of evidence. Let's quickly just look at D here. So pause and look at that. All right, coming back here, there are two main problems. One, there's no evidence in this. No quotes, nothing specific from the story that is cited. That's a problem. And the second problem is that this is confusing the writer of the essay's own view on this issue with the author's. We just want to stick with the author's observations here, right? Not to confuse that with your own observations. I mean, you could maybe talk about what you think about the topic in the conclusion, but not intermix it in the body pairs. It gets confusing for the reader. All right, so the good example here is example C, and if you want to take a look at the organizational format for that, you can look again at the prior video.